All right, world-class athlete, I want to welcome you to your Transformation Week forehand volley module, where in this video, we are going to comprehensively master everything that you need to know in order to be able to generate and become that player with a world-class forehand volley. So in this video, we're going to cover the 4 phases that every pro executes on every single forehand volley of the unit turn, the acceleration, contact, and the follow through. And what we're going to provide you with in this video is the exact when, the what, the why, and the how you're going to be executing this with truly world-class levels of technique. And even better than that, across each of these 4 phases, we're going to be mapping out 11 distinct anatomical biomechanical checkpoints that you can assess using your own footage to know with 100% confidence exactly A, what you should be focusing on, and B, what it's going to be like when you're that player at your club who has that flawless, in control forehand volley. So I'm feeling so fired up, I'm feeling so excited and confident that you're going to progress so quickly just by going through this video. And what I'd highly encourage you to do right now is, number 1, have out printed the downloadable PDF that you received in your Transformation Week welcome video. You can also download that PDF on this page. And I would also highly encourage you, if you don't already have it, have out footage of your forehand volley, frame by frame assessing to the downloadable stroke assessment video on this page as well. What that's going to empower you with is the clarity to know, specific to your volley, what are the exact anatomical changes that you need to improve to being able to generate that really fluid, effortless, and easy forehand volley just like that. All right, world-class athletes. So with that frame, let's go ahead and dive into phase number 1, which is going to be that perfect world-class unit turn position. So before the unit turn is initiated, what we're going to be looking for is a wide split step with the feet. What every single top volleyer in the world is going to do, right when they identify that their opponent is making contact with the ball, they're going to land a nice, wide, aggressive, comfortable, elegant, sophisticated split just like this. So the key checkpoints you want to look for are 3. Number 1, are you at least shoulder width apart? Number 2, are you on the balls of your feet? In other words, are your heels slightly off the ground? And number 3, is the lumbar region of your spine slightly inwardly curved? What this allows you to do is actually generate more speed and power from your legs, from your back muscles to confidently close at the net, just like that. So once you've initiated that split step, exactly when your opponent makes contact, let's now dive into the 11 key anatomical checkpoints associated with a world-class unit turn. So the first key checkpoint to look for, right when your opponent makes contact, you want to initiate a bend of anywhere from a 20-degree bend, depending on if the ball is very low, all the way up to a 90-degree bend. So if the ball is really low, you'll see the pros bending at around a 90-degree angle. But on the majority of volleys, anything above waist height, you only want to bend anywhere from 20 to 45 degrees, just enough to give you that ability of really effectively moving your body forward, of pouncing on the ball like that, being aggressive, being comfortable, being confident. The second checkpoint to assess is then how much on the forehand volley do the pros, and how much should you rotate your trunk? So what the pros execute on the majority of volleys is, once they've identified it's coming, is approximately a 45-degree rotation of the hip and of the trunk, just like that. Now this value can range, and what we'll find across each of the 4 phases of the unit turn, the acceleration, the contact, and the follow through, that on the forehand volley and the backhand volley, there is the most variation across values depending on any type of shot. So what we're going to do, and those 3 values are really determined by, number 1, how fast the ball is coming, how high or low the ball is, and thirdly, how far away or close that ball is. So on balls that are directly at you, you're actually going to rotate almost no value whatsoever. So if we look at top volleyers, you'll see when the ball comes right at them, there's going to be no rotation, but they're rather just going to have their arm out in front like that and then block just like that. So it's going to be a more concise, short stroke with no rotation. But on the majority, when the ball is about trunk level to hip level, you'll see that the pros are going to rotate at approximately a 45-degree value, just like that. So that's exactly how much you should bend, that's how to split, and exactly how much should you rotate. The third element to look for that has variation is how much flexion that you should have of your upper trunk, just like that. So what you'll see with the world's best volleyers is that when they're trying to take the ball early, when they're stepping forward, and also when the ball is high, they'll create anywhere from about 0 to a 30-degree flexion of the trunk. By leaning forward, it allows you to generate more power from your leg drive, as well as creates a more powerful contact position in front of the body. So if the ball was high and slow and my chest stayed completely upright, then I'd only be able to generate so much power on the ball. Whereas if I'm rotated or flexed in at about a 30-degree angle, this is now gonna allow me to step forward and drive the ball with so much more force and so much more power, just like that. So those are the 3 values to look for of the legs, the hip, and the trunk. Now let's dive into the 7 values in the range of outcomes associated with your hitting arm structure. So the first key value to look for is basically how high should your arm be on the forehand volley. This is what's known as shoulder flexion. In other words, how high do the pros raise their arm up? So there's a huge range of potential values that the pros achieve here. And those ranges are all the way from 0 degrees all the way up to about 100 degrees, just like that. So what we'll find is that on higher and slower balls, the world's best volleyers are gonna prep their racket at about 100-degree shoulder flexion. In other words, about this high. And what that's gonna allow them to do is aggressively drive the ball forward down into the court, just like that. Whereas when the ball is very low or it's very fast coming right at them, you'll see 0-degree shoulder flexion and the arm will be positioned just like that. The most common value that all the world's best volleyers achieve is approximately a 45-degree flexion value. So now you know the exact range of how high your arm should be, and you know when that range should be high and when it should be low. The second question of what constitutes world-class volley technique is going to be how far back or how far forward should your racket go back during that unit turn phase. Now, on this value, there's a range of potential outcomes of approximately a 0-degree value. In other words, your arm is basically just straight in front, line up with your chest, which is what's going to happen especially when the ball comes right at you. To number 2, all the way up to a 90-degree value. So this motion of the arm going backwards is what's known as horizontal shoulder abduction. So you want to be anywhere from 0 degrees all the way to 90-degree abduction. And additionally, with the flexion, you want to be anywhere from 0 degrees all the way up to 90 degrees as well. So anywhere in these potential ranges is where we're going to see the pros prep their racket on the forehand volley, and is an amazing checkpoint for you to assess depending on your volley. Now, when the pros have balls that are coming quickly right at them, that's when they're going to take a little bit less preparation. In other words, their arm is going to be more in front of the body, lined up with the chest, versus on slower balls where you're trying to generate more power, then the arm can abduct all the way up to that 90-degree value to being able to generate tremendous amount of force and pace on the volley for those slow high volleys. All right, world-class athlete, so we've already covered so much, and I hope you're starting to unlock so much clarity, especially as you're reviewing your stroke frame by frame to identify these specific values. But a quick refresher of what we've covered so far. The first is the 3 checkpoints of the split: balls of the feet, shoulder width apart, lordotic inward curvature of the spine. The second is basically how much should you be rotating your hips, all the way from a 0 to a 90-degree value if you're really stepping off to the side. The third thing we covered was how far flexed or extended should your trunk be going up to that 30-degree value to generate power. Then we covered exactly how high should you flex your shoulder from a 0 to a 90, and how much should you abduct your shoulder from a 0 all the way up to a 90-degree angle. So now we've covered those values. Now let's dive into how much should the pros bend or extend their elbow. So the pros are also going to have on this value anywhere from a 90-degree bend to a 180-degree bend. The most common that you want to look for and what you want to do, especially when the ball is coming right at you like a typical rally ball about trunk level, is you want to have that elbow either fully straight or with a little bit of bend. What this allows you to do is allows you to have the most concise, accurate swing going forward right into that perfect contact. So now we understand exactly where the elbow should be and why. Now the question is, how much should we either pronate or supinate our wrist? So what every top pro is going to do is on every single forehand volley, they're going to have at least a 10 to 30-degree supination of the forearm. In other words, you want to make sure that your racket is positioned slightly behind your hand. What this is going to allow you to do is accomplish two key benefits. Benefit number one is as you achieve that contact in front of the body, your racket will be positioned such that now the ball is going to be traveling perfectly forward over the net just like that, versus if our racket was not supinated, then if we went to that contact, our arm, the ball would be dropping straight into the net. The second tremendous benefit of having that racket supinated, or the forearm supinated and the racket behind the hand, is now it's going to allow you to generate more power from that internal rotation or pronation of that forearm, just like that. So that's exactly what you want to do with your forearm. The next question would be, how much should your racket be down or above the hand like that? So this plane of motion is what's known as ulnar deviation to radial deviation. So what's super critical for you to make sure you're doing, and this is one of the most common mistakes that personally allowed me to transform my volley as well, because I remember that when I would volley, I would have these high ambitions. I'd be watching all this pro tennis, but then when I would go out and volley, it just felt like super tight. It felt really weak, and I never knew why. It was because of this one key motion, which is what's known as radial deviation. What every pro achieves on their volley is a 10-degree to a 30-degree radial deviation of their wrist, just like that. This is what causes when you'll see pros execute their forehand volley uniturn, their racket is always going to be positioned up, just like that, creating a letter U from the racket all the way to the head, just like that. What this is going to allow you to do is, by performing just this one small motion of radial deviation, it's now going to allow you to tap into the bigger muscles of your shoulder, of your pec, your anterior deltoid, and your lat. To know what this really feels like, what I'd recommend you do is grab your racket if you have it at home, be using your continental grip, and go ahead and perform ulnar deviation and then push on your racket. And you'll notice right off the bat, you'll feel all this tension in your wrist, versus if you perform radial deviation, now when you push on the racket, whoa, you'll feel so much stronger, because now you're able to tap into all these big muscles, because internal rotation is now translating into the racket speed. So if I internally rotate my shoulder with a radially deviated position, see how my racket is generating power, versus ulnar deviation, nothing's happening. So essentially, just remember that by having the racket above the hand, you're going to automatically get more effortless power, more control, and there's going to be tension eliminated from your wrist. So the final two key checkpoints that we're now going to cover is how flexed or extended should your wrist be on the forehand volley. So what the pros do on every single forehand volley is, as they volley, they're going to create what's known as wrist extension. So in other words, you want to have your wrist in an extended position. This would be wrist flexion. This would be wrist extension. Wrist extension allows you to unlock two tremendous benefits. Benefit number one is that now when I accelerate, if I want to, I can place that ball down the line. And benefit number two is that by creating extension of the wrist, it's going to eliminate any tension from your wrist, because by being extended, when you make contact, the power is going to be transferred and translated from the shoulder, versus by being in a flex position, now it's coming from the wrist, which is going to cause wrist pain, wrist tension. So just remember, as you're accelerating, create a little bit of that wrist extension to make your palm facing the net. So when you accelerate, you're going to be able to place it either down the line or cross, and you're also going to remove and eliminate any tension in the wrist. All right, world-class athlete. The 10th and final anatomical checkpoint of the hitting arm is going to be how much externally rotated to internally rotated should we be. Identical to the forearm supination, we want to have anywhere from a 20-degree external rotation all the way up to a 90-degree external rotation. Again, if the ball is high and slow, we're going to create more of that external rotation so we can then confidently drive the ball down. Versus if the ball is quicker coming right at us, we're going to create a little bit less external rotation so we can just go forward and block the ball in front just like that. The 11th and final checkpoint for you to understand comprehensively exactly how to execute a world-class uniturn is going to be of the non-dominant arm. What we'll see with every top volleyer in the world is that when they execute their uniturn, they're going to release and have their non-dominant arm away on the left side of their body if they're a righty, or the right side if they're a lefty, in anywhere from a bent 90-degree position to a straight position, depending on how effectively they want to balance themselves. On harder shots, you'll see the pros straighten out their arm, because this then allows them to use their non-dominant arm as a balancing mechanism. So we have now covered comprehensively everything that you'd ever possibly need to know about achieving a world-class unit turn position. We broke down all of the 11 key biomechanical values in the range of values depending on the ball speed, the ball height, and the distance away from the body of the ball. If you felt overwhelmed by any of that, don't worry at all, I got you, because we're gonna confidently and comprehensively be going through all of these key values again in the follow along drill videos. And also you'll be able to just easily break down each of these 11 key checkpoints in the downloadable PDF. So with that, we now have comprehensive mastery of the unit turn. Let's now dive into the acceleration, building off all of that knowledge that we've just comprehensively covered. So the first thing to note with the acceleration is that whether the ball is high, whether the ball is low, whether the ball is fast or slow, you're always going to be performing two key anatomical motions of the hitting arm structure. And what that's going to be is, number one, you're going to be performing what's known as shoulder extension. Shoulder extension is basically that arm traveling down. Now, the reason why this is so powerful is because by accelerating on a downward path, that's not only going to allow you to generate more power, but it's also going to allow you to generate more control and accuracy, because you're going to be angling the ball down into the court just like that. The second benefit is that by swinging on that downward path, it's going to allow you to tap into that lat muscle, which is going to allow you to generate and feel so much more control from the bigger muscles of your body. So that's the first key anatomical motion to look for, is when you're accelerating, is your racket traveling directly down, or are you making the common mistake of swinging up and then down? A really common reason why so many players miss their volley long is because when they accelerate, they didn't realize that they were actually straightening their arm and going up, versus rather keeping their arm straight at the beginning and then just simply driving down like that. So that's the first key anatomical motion. The second is what's known as the horizontal shoulder adduction. So simply, all you have to do when you accelerate is two key things. Number one is drive your arm down and drive your arm forward. If you just accelerate using those two key motions, maintaining that activation relaxation spectrum with a very loose wrist and a loose forearm, you're already going to be on your way to so effectively executing with world-class volley technique. So as you're accelerating, essentially what's going to happen is you're going to start from those key range of values that we covered of either 0 to 90 degree shoulder flexion and 0 to 90 degree adduction. We've got the radial deviation, external rotation, supination, wrist extension, all those great values. Then as you accelerate, what's going to happen is you're going to step on most volleys from your right leg to your left leg, performing those two key anatomical motions of the extension, adduction, and lastly, making now contact with the ball with your arm positioned at approximately a 45-degree angle, adduction, just like that. Now, whether the ball is low, whether the ball is high at contact, that value is going to stay identical, of that arm being in front of the body at approximately a 45-degree angle. So now let's dive into the contact. We've already covered so much. The key element to focus on with your contact is, from those two acceleration points, with your contact, is your racket still maintaining some of that supination and wrist extension? What that's going to allow you to do is making sure that when you do make contact, all the tension, all the pressure is going to be taken out of your wrist and put into the bigger muscles of your body. So by just focusing on the very simple checkpoints of accelerating forward and down and making contact with your racket behind your hand and your wrist in an extended position, you're going to be on your way to generating that effortless pop and that control with your forehand volley. The last piece that we're going to cover now is the follow through. With the pro volley, there's going to be two primary follow throughs on that forehand side. When top players like Roger Federer are hitting down the line, what they're going to do is execute what I call the flourish follow through, which essentially looks like this. They're going to split. Here's their unit turn. Here's their acceleration forward and down. There's their contact, and their finish is going to look like this. So by finishing with that wrist extension, what that's going to allow you to do is very easily and fluidly place that ball down the line. Whereas when top players like Federer are driving the ball very aggressively, or they're hitting the ball cross court, they're going to execute what I call the drive follow through, which essentially looks something like this. They're going to make contact and drive the racket across, finishing with the racket tip perpendicular to court surface just like that. So just remember, as an easy cue, when you accelerate and you're aiming down the line or right in the center of the court, finish with your strings parallel to the net surface. Whereas if you're driving the ball aggressively or you're hitting cross, you can then finish with the racket perpendicular to court, just like that. All right, world-class athletes, so we have covered so much in this video, but I hope you're not feeling so confident, so in control, and so certain of, oh, got it, that's what constitutes world-class volleys. And if you've been following along using the PDF as well as your downloadable stroke assessment, you should now have so much confidence and clarity to know, unique to yourself, what should you be focusing on to develop with that world-class forehand volley technique? If you felt, again, overwhelmed at all by any of this information, don't worry, because once we get out on the court together, we're gonna be comprehensively breaking down everything again as we're following along together, putting this information into your unconscious muscle memory. All right, world-class athlete, I'm so grateful and excited that you've enrolled in Transformation Week. I'm so pumped to get out on the court with you right now as we go through these follow-along drill videos and develop your world-class forehand volley. Let's go.